circa 1997. Square released the 7th title in their mainline series of Final Fantasy, a story of the negativity of industry and science. Hoping that the game would do better outside of Japan than its predecessor, Square held its breath. And lo and behold, Final Fantasy VII rocked the world. Fans jizzed themselves with critical acclaim and widespread obsession, selling more copies around the globe than any other title Square had created. Little did they know, there was more jizzing to be had. 2000. Fans jizzed themselves when Square Enix announced it would recreate the beloved Final Fantasy VII for the PS2. But after Final Fantasy XIII and its sequels failed to meet the reviews they expected, all went quiet in the company. 2005. Fans jizzed themselves at E3 when Square Enix attempted to show off their new Crystal Tools engine for the PS3 by recreating the opening clip for Final Fantasy VII. More people cared about the idea of a remake than the actual engine they were showcasing, but Square Enix confirmed that Final Fantasy VII was not something they were planning on making. 2015. Fans jizzed themselves at E3 when Square Enix bit the bullet and revealed a teaser for, you guessed it, the Final Fantasy VII Remake. But those looking closely realized that Square Enix had announced an awful lot of high-budget AAA games recently, and started to worry. 2020. After releasing several other major titles, albeit of varying popularity, fans jizzed themselves when the Final Fantasy VII Remake was finally in their grasp. Almost out of nowhere, fans were given a release date and, even though it was given a small delay, the end was in sight. But how do you remake a classic? Is it possible to love again and have the same feeling of wonder and excitement our tiny minds once had? Well, that's what I'm willing to find out. A lot of people have attempted to meet this game halfway, balancing their views as both a standalone game and a love letter to the original. Well, I say screw that. I'm about to break this game down fully, comparing it to my all-time favourite game. Don't get me wrong, I completely understand that some mechanics and topics needed changing over the years, but how much was necessary? And how much is even good? So I ask you to delve with me into the livestream and watch my subconscious fragment trying to dissect Final Fantasy VII Remake. So as we are all very much aware, the Final Fantasy VII Remake covers the Midgar section of the original story. In terms of locations, it's all there in the same order, going there for the same reasons. Reactor 1 to blow it up, Sector 7 slums to get paid, Reactor 5 to blow it up, Sector 5 slums, not by choice, Wall Market to save Tifa, sewers and train graveyard because Don Corneo is misogynistic, Sector 7 pillar to save the slums, Wall Market to get high, Shinra Tower to save Earth, and a glorious escape on the Midgar Highway. There are a few extra never-before-seen locations added into the remake, such as the city on the Sector 7 plate, and what I'm assuming is a reference to Dirge of Cerberus' Deep Ground. These don't impact the original story in any way and act as more like filler episodes between main events from the original. Honestly, there's not much more to say about this. The premise of the original is the same, solely because they took a 2-hour segment and stuffed it like a cam girl. That is, wasting your time to an immeasurable amount while you look longingly at the pretty. I'm not a massive fan of cross-genre music covers, so most of the new Final Fantasy VII soundtrack wasn't overly enjoyed, but more appreciated. A lot of time went into rewriting the original tracks into jazz, hard rock, so on and so forth. I do think it might be underappreciated, but that's a fault on you for spending God knows how long doing something you've already done a number of times. This is where the crux of the problem lies. There are thousands of metaphors that encompass and define this game. Countless companies before it have attempted the same ideals, and when that game fails, nobody else actually chooses to learn from it. El Shaddai, Alice Madness Returns. Oh, I'm sorry, is that too obscure? How about Assassin's Creed, Destiny, Crisis 1, 2, and 3, Crackdown 1 and 2, and, because irony is a bitch, the entire Final Fantasy XIII series. Stop making pretty games. Don't misunderstand. Final Fantasy VII is gorgeous. It is graphically perfect, adding little nuances like when you change weapons you can actually see them. The materia slots are a much wow added bonus too. Character models that were once anatomically impossible have been delicately carried into a golden age. Buildings and iconic cutscenes replicated to a masterful degree. It's all done to encompass the art style of Advent Children, down to the smallest detail. But if you spend 90% of your budget on graphics, do you know what you get? Repetitive gameplay, terrible plot devices, jarring voice acting, abrupt segues, stretches into absolutely fuck all, and of course, hallways, hallways, hallways. Do you have bathophilia? Well, you're in luck because you can now have a 50-hour boner. And don't get me wrong, I know full well the Final Fantasy VII had hallways. It actually had quite a few. But a few things to note is that A, they were not all so narrow you literally have to bump into every NPC to get past, and B, they were constantly broken up by random encounters, which funnily enough is just another nail in this coffin. So I want to add a third game into this comparison in terms of gameplay. Final Fantasy 15. No, I'm kidding. That is way too easy. I'm using the original Final Fantasy because I'm on a roll and I need to beat this already dead horse. Take the world itself. Final Fantasy 1. Sprawling world map, maze-like dungeons, can venture in and out of any location due to there being no unrevisitable areas. Final Fantasy 7. Sprawling world map, somewhat linear dungeons with some side rooms, lots to explore with only a few specific choice sections of no return. Final Fantasy VII Remake. Look at the map between Sector 7 and Sector 6. That is a line. One single line. And half of the game is locked out, not when you finish it, but as you traverse it. The game does not let you backtrack until literally the end of the game, and only lets you traverse the bare minimum of it. What about party customizations? Final Fantasy 1. You start by choosing 4 party members out of 6 different classes to create a unique team, each class with specific and strategic pros and cons. Each class has unique weapons and abilities, but your starting party defines your strategy for the rest of the game. For the record, the game is so balanced that you can beat it with any combination, including 4 white mages. Final Fantasy VII. Characters join your party as you progress, with the option of swapping out party members almost at a whim. Even though they are fundamentally different, it's not impossible to tweak a character into any role thanks to the immense materia and hundreds of combinations available. Weapons are unique to each character, but abilities can be fitted to anyone, for infinite possibilities. Final Fantasy VII Remake. Is it the same as the original? In the same way milk is the same as cream. Party members come and go, but even at the very end of the game when you have all of the available characters, fuck you Square for denying us red, you can't change your party. You have 4 party members and 3 slots. Why is that so difficult to wrap around? Hats off to keeping the main materia mechanic of the game intact though, so shaping a character into a role is still available. Except there's no point, because of the sheer specificity of the enemies. Alright, time to drop some motherfucking numbers. Final Fantasy 1. 195 enemies and bosses that are sometimes palette swaps, but different enough that you can tell what you're up against. Even though some enemies and super bosses require specific strategy, everything else can be steamrolled if you have a broad understanding of how the game works. Final Fantasy 7. 270 enemies, and that's lowballing in terms of parts. The game's code actually holds 300 named creatures. Genuinely look it up. The enemies are diverse enough, with again most enemies defeatable with standard setup, bar a few, but that's honestly narrowed down to 2 super bosses and the final boss of Disc 1. Then we get to the remake. 114. That's a little on the low side, but it could be worse, right? Here's the thing. Half of the enemies in this game are either for once and never again, or specific to battle simulations. 50% of the enemies in this game are just one-time showcases, and that's all they are. The devs are just saying, remember this enemy? Well, here's how it looks in HD! Whoa! Wait, what do you mean you've already seen it? What the fuck is a realm re- And just because I do my research, yes, the original Midgar actually has less enemies at 47. The difference is diversity and frequency. Out of those 47 enemies, there are only 11 one-time enemies, making it less than a quarter. Not only that, but random encounters are just that. Random. It defeats the whole purpose of mystery if I know exactly what is around this corner. Ha! I'm kidding. There are no corners. What's worse is how the customization is completely walled behind bullshit niche strategies from bosses and enemies that you only find out, not while fighting it, but after you've been pummeled half a dozen times. I get you want to include the sense material. It was great in the original. But I guarantee you that any first-time player of the original will use it the first couple of times when they pick it up and then forget about it. Because there was no materia in the game that was necessary. Because that's how strategy and mechanics works. Why do I have to equip a materia that I need at all times? You might as well have a materia just for attacking, or another just to have an ATB. Either make a specific ability mandatory that I can always use anytime, or let me be able to beat the game without it, and stop giving me stupid high maintenance strats to bosses. I went back and tried to beat Hell House with no materia at max level. It took 3 hours. In contrast, you can take any boss outside the crater of Final Fantasy VII and beat it in minutes at max level and no materia. In fact, at max level, you can waltz through the entire first disc in the same amount of time it takes to beat Hell House. It sounds like a stupid thing to argue, but strategy is meant to be fluid, not hog-tying you to a chair and waterboarding you until you say what the game wants to hear. So the game throws a pathetic amount of random encounters, and then pads the combat out with stupid long boss fights that you probably lose the first time because the game is telling you that you're playing it wrong. But if there's anything this game has shown me, it's that Square Enix deciding to stretch a 4-hour segment into 60 hours needs more than combat fluff. You need to burst that shit at the seams. The entire shit show of the storytelling is where I cracked. As a whole, the story seems more forced upon the character and less spitball ideas Cloud or any of the others have. A perfect example is just after the play collapses. Your party is discussing a way to get to Shinra Tower. In the original, Tifa suggests, well, let's go to Wall Market. We might be able to find something there. There's an indication where you should go, given that you have most of Midgard to explore now, but no actual clue how that might help. You have to do your own digging and find out for yourself not only how to get up there, but that you also need batteries and where to get them. It's a suggestion. Tifa actually seems like she just guessed. In the remake, Tifa instead sighs, I know someone who might, explicitly pointing out that Don Corneo probably has the answer, with not even a titty fuck of evidence as to why. She might as well have added, he's probably still in Wall Market, in his mansion at the South End. Do you remember that thing in the sewers? I hope we don't have to see that again. There is so little finding out for yourself. Everything is told to you. You have to walk down this corridor. You have to fight this boss. You have to walk so fucking slowly it makes me grind my teeth, just so Aerith can run ahead of you, just so she can block your path, because you have to hold down triangle for a fucking decade, because you have to give her a high five, which is not mentioned, or referenced, or even alluded to afterwards, making it an absolute pointless endeavour. But again, the game needs to pad this out and make it worth, what, the $200 fucking dollars they paid for this game? The parts of the story that are added are there just to make you keep playing, to actually get to a point in the story with some traction. Spoilers, it doesn't. Making Tifa have to do some... Honestly, I don't even know what the fuck this is. It's the worst Ninja Warrior I've ever seen. Anyway, you spend a solid 5 minutes of this just so she can fall, so you can spend another 10 minutes doing more pointless bullshit. The story is so far beyond snail's pace handholding, it's closer to your parents showing you how to play Scalextrics for 50 hours. A franchise that was built around a huge, fantastic, explorable world, full of wonder and adventure. This isn't what Final Fantasy was about. This is what Telltale games are about. And look how well they're doing right now. Oh wait, they're not. The most notable change that was made to the story is, of course, one of the main hushed worries of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, Wall Market. Or, more importantly, Cloud's cross-dressing scene. Now, I want you to take a minute and recall as much as you can regarding the original Final Fantasy VII scene. Cloud finds out Tifa is going to be boned by Don Corneo, and you can't enter because you're a guy. So you convince a dressmaker to make you a dress, you go to the gym and complete a workout bet to obtain the wig. Everything else involving this quest is optional. You give a drunken patron a pharmacy item for perfume, and run an errand for a shop owner for a tiara, and of course undergarments for going to the gentleman's club. During this whole escapade, there is one slight remorse regarding Cloud wearing a dress, which is from the dress owner, and I quote, "What? A tough looking guy like that?" And that's it. And if you really break this down, he's not even commenting that he is a guy, simply that he is so muscular that a dress probably won't suit him. He even goes back on himself later to say that it could be a new business venture. So you're probably wondering, why did I bring this up? 2 words, social acceptance. At the time, Square didn't need to plaster into your face that dressing up as a girl was an okay thing to do. To other characters, nobody cares because everyone in this seedy part of Midgard keeps themselves to themselves. And the player didn't need to hear it either because Cloud was only dressing up to save Tifa, which in my opinion is a fair enough reason. That's all that is. Which brings us to this monstrosity. Cloud is forced to prance about in an extremely sexual way with a flamboyant man for the sole purpose of attempting to trick our brains into thinking, maybe he could get away with dressing like a girl. Because he could be flamboyant too. It's dumb. It's unnecessary and completely throws the point as to why you're doing this out the window. Square Enix took the plot point of desperate times, desperate measures, bent it over the table, and spit roasted it with political correctness. The entire building is shockingly out of place because of it. It's no longer a tacky, uncomfortable brothel for the scum of Midgard to cop a feel. But now it looks like a high-tier Broadway venue with happy smiles and happy customers. It's the second biggest story change in the game, and the second worst story change of the game. Ooh boy. I spent 20 hours of this game giving it the benefit of the doubt, but the second you save Aerith, it just decided to progressively wear me thin. Ignoring the fact that Hojo is supposed to only have one floor, but apparently is 500 feet tall and 3 times the width of the other floors. Disregarding that you actually see Sephiroth in the flesh before he doesn't kill the president. And through gritted teeth, I will forgive giving us Red 13, but not letting us use him. The entire ending of this game is still a mess. The plot twist goes like this. The game devs are trying to hit home that they want to tell a reimagining of the story, and went all meta and created the Whispers. These Whispers are supposed to force crucial events to happen in a certain way, i.e. to mirror those of the original Final Fantasy VII. The characters of the remake are saying fuck you Destiny and attempt to fight it. It sounds good on paper, and if you told me that at the start, I'd be pretty interested. That interest would quickly turn into passive aggressiveness because there was no fucking point to it. Every instance of the Whispers was completely idiotic, because it was either you attempting to stop a main plot point from happening, and you fail, or they're thrown in for no reason. Oh no, Aerith nearly fell to her not death. Good thing this ominous ghost that we keep fighting was here to help. What's worse is the idea that you fight the entity of Destiny and win. You fight the manifestation of an abstract idea that, if is actually true, could never lose unless it says so. This is a traditional Final Fantasy boss, a quarter of the way through the story. That means that the actual final boss, as well as everything else Cloud comes across, cannot defeat him. Speaking of actual final boss, Sephiroth is also here, for some reason, and you beat him, and he puts you on the moon. For no fucking reason. What the actual fuck? It's like Nojima died before he finished the story, and his 12-year-old kid had to finish it, but doesn't know how to read. The entire problem of Final Fantasy VII Remake boils down to what Square Enix thought was important. If anything, the thing they spent so much time perfecting was the least important thing in the original. It was about taking part in a whirlwind of an adventure, with the ups and downs that go with it. The original had so much hard work put into it. Not the visible details, but everything in between. Everything Final Fantasy VII gave you was to convey the emotion it needed to. Daunting music as you look across the world map for the first time. Open barren cities where civilizations once stood. Winding depths into the unknown. The game conveyed emotion to the player, not made the player sit through the "it's a small world" ride. Too many video games nowadays want to tell you a story. They want to sit you down and say things to you for hours on end. But that's not a video game, that's a book. You want to live the story, writing the story as you see fit. Sure, it might look the same, but it's freedom to progress at your pace, to turn and say, maybe I don't want to do this right now, or maybe I want to try it this way. Look at some of the most popular games of last year. No, not the journalists and businesses that get down on their knees and lick the ballsack of false advertising. Actual reviewers. Ones that don't get paid to say what they think. To actually admit if a game has flaws. Because you start to notice that a lot of games, Apex Legends, DMC5, Fallen Order, they're all just flashy spectacles that ooh and ah the player. I mean, for God's sake, look at the name of your franchise, Square Enix. This started because this was your last-ditch effort at a saving grace. You went whole ham and made not the flashiest or the fastest, but a fantasy. And if Square Enix thinks that this is the direction they should be going, then this just might be my Final Fantasy. Well, if you somehow managed to get to the end of this rant, thank you so much. If you haven't had enough of the remake, I've done a non-nostalgic review, and if that still doesn't do it for you, you can watch me play the remake too, which was, as you can guess, a harrowing experience. Thank you all again for watching, and I shall see you next time. Bye!